So I'm going to keep, I meant to get paper towels while I was out there. Oh well, here we go. So I'm going to get all that shadow coming across her face here. Another thing I like to do is, if you look at the reference photo real closely, you can see that the shadow line does not come all the way to the side of her face. You can see a little bit of light, and so what I'm doing is stopping my paint before I get to the pencil line. So I'm getting that same kind of effect with the light there. And then we've got the underneath of her chin. And then notice that notice where the light is on her chin. It's darker. I found my paper towels. It's darker closest to her chin, and it's lighter closer to the hat. So all of those kinds of things are super important when you're trying to get some dimension. And then with the lips, I just really encourage you, don't paint them a solid color. Every color that you use, just use it for some of the lip. So like with the Payne's Blue Gray, the darkest part of the lip is going to be kind of the underside of her top lip, and maybe there's a little bit of darkness in the center of her bottom lip. And then we're going to come back in and layer other colors on top of that, and each layer of color will add to the dimension. So don't paint, really, for me with watercolor, I try not to paint anything a solid color, like not a solid line. I did do that a little bit on the eyebrows, but what you'll see as we build up is I won't continue to fill that in. So this ends up being kind of a mid-tone, and I will come in with a darker dark later and things like that. So it's just trying to build up those layers with different dimensions of color. So again, I'm putting shadow over here, and I'm not taking it all the way to the hat line. I've got a hair right there. I'm not sure if it's cat hair or paintbrush hair, but it's there right now. Alright, and so I'm going to notice now the shadow on her hat. You know, this part of her face is highlighted, and then her hat is really in shadow, so we're going to try to capture some of that. And that's where the big brush is really useful. And I'm going to turn my page because I want to come back in with some water, and I'm going to soften this line a little bit. It's a pretty hard line in the reference photo, but that's not what I want. Not yet, anyway. And so this ear is pretty much in shadow, but there are some light points in it. So there's some light in the center of the ear there. There's like little points of light here and there. So I'm going to use my Payne's Blue Gray to kind of do some outline like we just did on the hat, but and I'll probably take my tissue and blot some places off. So we're pushing that watercolor, we're telling it where we want it to go. And because this is just our first layer, we've got lots of buildup that we can still do. So don't go heavy-handed because we will come back and do more. And so with the inner ear, I'm going to use my Payne's Blue Gray, but I'm not going all the way up to that line. And I'm also not going to do the center. So I'm going to use I'm not going all the way up to my pencil line. And I'm going to keep a minimal amount of paint in the center. I'm actually going to take my tissue, my paper towel, and get that wet and blot some of it out. And I'm going to do that a little bit on the ear just because it's giving it a little bit of some kind of effect, and I kind of like that. Alright, so looking at the other ear and the hat, so there's some shadow on the hat down here. And up here. So I think I'm going to do the top ear, and then I'm going to have to turn my paper around. So same as the other ear, kind of stay within the pencil line. I'm constantly wiping my brush off. And with a wet brush you can really lift that paint off. I'm not going to the edge of the page either. And then notice there's light right here, so I'm gonna, I missed that on this tip of the ear here. So I'm just getting that wet, taking my paper towel, and I'm lifting that off. So don't be afraid, the paper stays, the paper is absorbing your paint, but it also doesn't absorb so quickly that you can't get it off. And we can try to achieve a bent look by noticing where we make it darker and lighter in here, and that will probably come a little bit more with building up the layers of color rather than right now, but we can still pay attention to what that looks like. And because that's wet, if I put more color in it right now, it's just going to bleed. So I'm going to leave that alone. And I'm going to move down here. There's some shadow all along the edge of her hat. I'm going to keep this a little bit harder over here because it's darker. So I'm not going to soften the edge of that one. Versus this side, I softened it a little bit more. So, you know, something to think about as you're painting, where do you want hard lines or soft lines? Like this is a really dark shadow and the nose shadow, and so those lines could be really nice to have hard. The outside line of her forehead, having that hard to define her forehead is good, and then softening the inside, excuse me, towards the inner part of her forehead. You know, you just kind of have to experiment with how are you getting the look that you want. Now I am softening this up a little bit because I'm going to come back in, we'll come back in later and add some lines. But what I'm trying to do is leave a little bit of white space down here to help identify where the folds are in her hat. And then it's super bright here, so no color here. Not right now anyway. Alright, and then I'm going to put a little bit of shadow here. I'm really not going to do much on this, on her neck, because it's starting to go off the page. But it is there. Something else I don't do that you may want to do is tape my canvases or my paper off, and you can see right here I've got turquoise left over, turquoise ink from something else I did, and it actually goes through my entire pad. So I could have taped that off. It's even over here, but oh well, it is what it is. I could take some white and paint over that. So we've got our whole underpainting complete right now. And we're going to let that dry before we do the next part.